just mute and stop there. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you for logging on and attending this evening's program. My name is Matt Schumann. I am on the programming team here at Cary Library. Before we begin, just a few things to note. Please let me know if there are any technical issues that I can try to resolve. You can send those to me in the chat. And any questions or comments you can send via the Q&A button, and we'll address those at the end. This program is made possible by the generous donors, the Cary Library Foundation. I'd like to now introduce Ashley Rooney, host of our gardening series. She is the past president of the Lexington Field and Garden Club and is a prolific author, as well as a rich source of gardening knowledge, bringing some of Lexington's and the region's experts to the library to help you with your gardening. Ashley will be back on March 11th at 7 p.m. with Waste Not, Treasure in Your Garden with Shoba, Reginald, and Ivan Bosch. Now, please welcome Ashley.
Thank you, Matt. And I am so pleased today. My friend Regina Sutton introduced me to Jim Harshbarger way back when I was looking for a pruner, because so many people in Lexington have asked me, how do I prune? What do I do? When can I do? And so I asked Jim if he would come down and show me his stuff. And we practiced at the Church of Our Redeemer, and we made that property look so much better. He made that property look so much better. I didn't do anything but tote branches that day. One morning, I was thrilled and knew he had to be on this program. So today he has a great presentation, and we're going to get started right now because there are an awful lot of people who signed up for this program, and there are going to be a lot of questions at the end. So let's get going. Jim, you're on.
Good evening. My name is Jim Harshbarger. I am a practicing arborist in Massachusetts now for quite a number of years. And Ashley, as she said, asked if I would be willing to give a class on pruning. I have slides here which should be educational and lead you to potentially ask questions, whatever you wish. Between Ashley and myself, I hope that we can requirements. Start with the first slide. That I was going to do a presentation on pruning. This photograph taken last summer out on Cape Cod seemed a great place to start. At the photograph, there's nothing in this that isn't pruned to make it look like the gorgeous home site that it was. And certainly, as you can look at this, middle of July, everything is jumping out at you. But if you were to take it apart and look at it, the hydrangeas are going to have to be deadheaded. The lilies at the front of the border by the picket fence will have to be deadheaded. The spirea to the lower right has already passed flowered and is going to have to be sheared. The heath on the walkway that's creeping out needs to be pruned so that it doesn't take over the walkway. And in the back, you've got lilacs, and those are pruned every year as well. Unless you knew to look like this, none of these things would show up. I'm sorry, one other thing to mention, just below the American flag on the upper left, those are all roses. And in order to increase the amount and the tenacity of the flowers, you always deadhead roses. So just as a start, everything that I look at from the eyes of an arborist, which in this case need to be pruned. Now, the next slide begs a question. Matt, there you go. What to do, or does it matter? I snuck this picture in Marblehead without the homeowner seeing it, and maybe it doesn't matter. Let me tell you a little bit what an arborist wants to be able to deliver. An arborist understands plants, understands the health of plants, the insects, the diseases, all of these different things. So when I talk about pruning, I'm talking about when it's best to prune that particular plant to maintain the vitality and vigor of the plant, and also to meet the client's needs. Now, in this client's front yard, he's got a vertical holly on the left-hand side going up above the roof. onto the gutters. He's got Japanese hollies that are covering up probably his front living room windows. And then underneath the American flag is an Alberta spruce, which is only about half the size it's going to be. And at some point they're going to say, this is too big. Why did we plant this here? So several messages. One, it makes a difference to me because a house, especially from the street, can have curb appeal. Pruning is like adding lipstick to a house. It makes it pop and it looks like it's being cared for. In this instance, I would take the objects to the left and prune those back away from the windowsills and the vertical form. I would lower them below the gutters. I would take the Japanese hollies down to the windowsill at the center and open up the windows for more light inside. And then on the Alberta spruce, when is it going to be too much? Because Alberta spruces can't be pruned. They're only about 3 inches of needles, and after that it's deadwood. What likely should happen there is to remove that and plant another holly similar to what's now next to the windows, and it would all be finished. So if it matters, it should be done. But obviously these people didn't make any difference. So the next slide, please. The first thing that Ashley and I were talking about this evening was someone's property that was overgrown. And I said, that'd be a great thing to show people. I hope you like wisteria. This is overgrown and it begs the question, where to start? What I would tell people about this is I was taught a long time ago when I worked at Texas Instruments. It said it was objectives, strategies, and tactics. The objective here, if this house is going to be kept, is to get these plants under control. Strategies are how you're going to do it and when, and then the tactics is what are you going to do first? My thought is I'd leave the flowers until they'd finish flowering just to be able to enjoy it. And then you've got to get all of this plant material off the house because it's destroying the wood or whatever the finish is, the stucco. It's holding moistures, it's holding bugs, and that needs to all come off. But again, it all happens in stages, and it all can be taken apart the way that you would take apart an erector set. Everything has got a certain part to play, whether it's the hedges in front, the ornamental trees, the peonies in front, anything you like. But there's a way of breaking this into bite-sized pieces that would make sense to any homeowner. And then if you add to this, as I'll cover here, you can do it by seasons because everything is not done at once. Everything it has to be done by season for the best advantages for the plant. Next, please. I had a pruning presentation that I gave in Marblehead to a garden club. And this lady, Barbara, all dressed up in her Irrigation-after floppy hat and all these fancy gardening clothes. They just brought all these people together. And before I started to release these people to my home and let them practice pruning on different plant types that I was showing that day, one of the women said, I brought my Felcos, which are a kind of pruning shear, but they're dull. I guess I need to buy new ones. And I said, okay, ladies, let's go back one, sit back down. Let's talk about how to sharpen your tools. Felco shears are $50 a pair and you don't need to buy them if they're dull. So what I did was I went and scrounged up my little file, which is the object you see in the middle here with the blonde handle. It costs $4. And anything that you're looking at there, from the head shears to the hand pruners to the pole pruners, can be sharpened in 2 minutes by anyone. You can practice it yourself. I do it once a week or so on all of my tools that I'm using. You would do it once a year. But the plant would appreciate it if you were sharpened the tools. You get better cuts, and the better cuts make for better healing of the plant. And it really is a trivial thing to do. It's like sharpening a knife if you know how to sharpen a knife. Very, very straightforward. The last thing to say here with regards to tools is the tools are a potential point of spreading diseases on plants. And there's certain kind of plants that will get diseases, and an arborist would only prune them by disinfecting whatever that they were going to be doing during the cutting process or the pruning process. I use Lysol spray disinfectant. You just take the can out, spray it with your hand, wave it across, and you're done. That way you don't worry about spreading things. So just as a quick note. The last point to say here real quick, everything that you see here is called a bypass pruner. They work exactly the same way as scissors. Each blade bypasses or cuts across the other. That's the better style. The alternate is a type of pruning called anvil pruners, and they literally take one blade and crush it against the other and flatten the material you're cutting, and that damages the plant. So the bypass pruners, like I said, that you see here, this is the way to go. Next, please. I want to give you some examples of what I think are plants that need to be pruned and talk about how they can be accomplished and try to make it straightforward and simple for you. This property was in Winchester. It was a historic home. Someone had built these new stone walls here about 6 years ago, put in the plants, and promptly ignored them after that. I'm sure some of you know that stone walls are pretty expensive. I like to see both the plant and the stone walls, and the upper stone wall has almost disappeared.
Yeah.
An aesthetic that I would suggest to any owner is that you want to see both, and you want to see the symmetry in the plants in the foreground, which obviously you've got the little hostas, the lime green plants in the lower area, but these plants are Japanese hollies. They look strangely like boxwood, but they're not. And what I told the client I wanted to do was shape them in a round fashion. All of them are going to have the height reduced, which is simply taking off plant material from the tops, that I was going to contain the sides so that I would differentiate one plant from the next. And then any branches growing forwards towards the hostas would be reduced and put back towards the main plant. In the process of doing this, I've increased the eye appeal of the property as you entered the driveway. The hollies here won't have to be pruned for another 3 years. The stone wall is much more visible and is certainly a nice feature. And overall, we enhanced the property, and the clients were very happy with this. The amount of time, I think there were 6 Japanese hollies here. It was a minor part of my work that day. Maybe it took me 2 hours or so, and they won't need them, like I said, for another 3 years. Next, please. Another example of a common plant material that we have used more as a specimen is the Japanese maple. They come in all sizes and shapes. Normally, colors are red or green. This is a green one and has fancy leaves, the split leaf variety. And you'll see these, in this case, highlighting the back porch area. I think it's one of the favorite plants of mine to work with, and certainly in the landscapes to enjoy. This plant I prune every August, September. It takes me about 2 hours. This is 1 year's growth, and you really can't, other than calling it a mop right now, you can't tell one end from the other. I wanted to take you through my mind's eye how I would go about pruning this plant. The first thing that you realize once you bopped around a bit, this plant can't be pruned effectively for the way that I prune from the outside. You can see things about it. We'll come back and talk about that. But here's my mind in how I look at things. The first thing I have to do is I have to clean the canopy. And I'll explain all these terms. Then I want to thin the canopy. Then I'm going to go back and shape the outside, which is called crown reductions or crown elevation or whatever we're going to do. But in going through and cleaning out the canopy, the easiest way to do this is you get inside the tree. So imagine Jim on his hands and knees. He's down there in the bushes, and I come back up inside the plant. Once I'm inside there, I can see everything that is being covered up by all the green leaves for you. I am looking at the dead wood that accumulates over the year. I'm looking at anything that's been chewed on, and there's branches underneath there. There's 2 or 3 golden labs that are always underneath there. And I'm fixing all of their problems and cutting up the necessary joints that have been damaged. I'm looking for branches that are growing the wrong way. Plants that I prune, I like to see with radiating branches, and like bicycle spokes going out to the edge of the wheel. And Japanese maples have habits of putting out new branches, and they're going left, right, up, down, everything. And it tends to look like a bad hair day. So I want to go through and neaten it up. And then I've finished what I call the crown clean. The crown thinning is important for the aesthetics and for the safety of the tree. The aesthetics, because when a Japanese maple, in my mind, is properly pruned, you want to have negative space in between the branches so the birds can fly through. And certainly right now, if a bird flew into it, it would never come out. So I open it up by thinning the branches that look to be duplicates of next door neighbors. And there's a lot of branches, and it's, once you see the plant and you look at it, I got it, I see it. So you go through and you'll thin the plant out, and that I mentioned safety. Japanese maples, this upright variety, it's about 10 or 12 feet high and 16 feet wide. They have a terrible habit with the snows that we continue to get to accumulate the snows on their pads that are all reaching out horizontally. And as the snow accumulates and then it thaws, it gets heavier and heavier, and Japanese maples break. They will break the crux of the branches at the base, the tops, anywhere they can. And my idea of thinning for safety is by reducing the number of branches in a horizontal pad area, you can allow the snow to fall through. And that then protects the plants. Then the last thing is, I've mentioned, I'm standing back now, I'm looking at it aesthetically and saying, okay, now what doesn't look right? Well, over on the right-hand side, you can see the beginning of the plant reaching over onto the deck. And of course, it goes around to the doors and it's in the way. So I have to contain those branches by bringing them back to an aesthetically looking shape inside the mulched area. On the upper left, you've got branches going out, and there again, I've got to bring those back in. Something I haven't said yet, but it's critical. If you're going to prune, you need to have a plan. Now, when I showed you the house in Marblehead with the Japanese hollies and the Alberta spruces growing over the windows, you have to know what you're going to do there. And that's easy because you've got a template. You use the shape of the windows, or in the case of the property with the Japanese hollies just before, I used the stone wall. Here, you've got to know what a Japanese maple looks like. If you don't know what it looks like, you don't know what it's going to be like. You may never get there. And the problem there is you want it to look desirable, and it's not only how the plant looks now, but how it's going to grow in the future. So by reducing and shaping it in a flat top with rounded sides, you'll find the shape to be pleasing, that it's open and the birds can fly through. This tree takes me approximately 2 hours to prune, and it'll be happy until next fall when I prune it again. Next slide, please. This is the third example I have of another typical New England plant. These are crab apples that had flowered early in the season, but the homeowner here had some planting inefficiencies, and we hadn't spoken for 4 years. And this is the result of that. The plant's set in the front of the house. So as you enter the house, you see these out of control crab apples that are reaching out into the circular driveway that you physically have to park next to and get out of your car, doors, whatever. And in instances here, when I arrived, I call them vigilantes. Somebody come out with something and just started whacking back the branches because they were in their way. So I had told them, I said, well, previously it had taken me 3 hours. This took 7. The first steps are exactly the same as what we had talked about before when we were at the Japanese maples. There are 5 crab apples here. You can't tell except for the trunk on the left side. You can't see a crab apple. All you can see is green, dark leaves and shoots going straight up in the air. My first step here, again, is going in and doing the canopy clean. So I go in looking for suckers, those uprights that are growing off the main branches of the trees. All of those come off. All of the dead wood, any crossing branches that are rubbing, things like that don't make any sense. Branches that are growing inward, growing into the circle, they won't get any light in there anyway, and it'll be healthier if the branches were growing out. So all inward branches are cut off. The next step is to go through and start thinning the plant out so that you can thoroughly see the structure of the plant. And I'm talking about the base where it emanates from the ground to the branches going up 3 feet high. And then as they spread out horizontally, all of the nice pleasant shapes that the trees have, leaving leaves on top to continue to do the photosynthesis for the tree. After that, then I can come back outside. So the first thing is I was inside the plants and I was in there for hours, just trying to clean the plants out. Now I'm outside and I'm looking to the left. I can see the plant is over the driveway, and I use the driveway as a template saying nothing goes outside the driveway. So that's my mind's eye. And I'm drawing a curve that's going up from the driveway to the top of the trees that are about, when I finished, 8 feet high. And then on the right-hand side, I've got the same situation. I've got to go get all of those branches and prune them back to the driveway, or a little bit more, because they certainly will grow out this year, and on around the corner. The last thing to mention here, there's a term called canopy elevation. And on the right-hand side, you can barely see a little bit of the trunks of the trees, but not much. I would go in here and take those lower branches. It's a tree, it's supposed to see a trunk of a tree. Otherwise it'd be a shrub. So those lower branches are elevated by removing them. And then again, standing back. And I tell people constantly, my favorite saying about pruning is, I ask people, have you ever played pickup sticks? I said, yep. I said, everybody knows the rules. You got to bring out each stick without wiggling the rest of them. Well, pruning's like that too. You prune and then you look. And then you prune and then you look. But if you started out and just did it all, you wouldn't have the effect that you want, because you're constantly adjusting. If I take this off, what's this one going to look like? So it's pickup sticks, and it's has a nice, pleasant appearance when you're finished. Now for some details for you. Next slide, please. These are viburnums, which are another common plant. Hydrangeas and viburnums are the typical go-to shrubs for homeowners. These it's called doublefile, which is a kind of viburnum that have 2 sets of flowers that go out the branches. It's a spring flowering white flower, and I think they're gorgeous. To emphasize a point here, these plants had been pruned last fall. I've pruned these before, and this was, we're there in August. The growth that you see, the vertical growth, that's all brand new growth, and it needs to come back out so that we can find the original style and basis of the plant. The other thing that comes to mind here that also should be mentioned is plant material needs to be pulled away. I'm using the word prune. Pulled away from the house, because keeping plants exposed to houses will increase the amount of moisture against the open wood or the painted wood or the stucco or whatever the plant material and building material are. And that's bad for the growth of mold, and it also puts insects in contact with the house. And any of the exterminating people would say, hey lady, you got to get these plants away from the house. Arborists say it differently, but it's the same thing. So we pull the plants away from the house. Then I've got to go through and start, as I said before, I'm in the back of the plants looking at the structure and reducing with pruning cuts the plant until it has a pleasant point that is balanced. Now, on the left-hand side of the picture, you can see the darker area, those are yews. And the line in my mind that I had was to continue in a rounded shape each of the viburnums to fit the structure of the height of the yew, but have their own viburnum-like shape. On the next slide, you can see the structure of one of the branches. So the branches emanating from the lower left underneath the leaf cover and growing to the right-hand side. I am going to show you on the next, don't move the slides yet. Thank you. On the next slide, the cut that I make, in the case of viburnums, those are an opposite leaf plant. In other words, that the leaves on all viburnums, the leaf go up once on one side, one on the other, and you're looking at them, the pink upper right and the lower right leaves form a union at that singular point, and the cut that you want to make, and the cut that I made on the Japanese maples and on the Japanese hollies, sorry, they're Japanese, but that's just the plants that I had pictures of. And in this case, the viburnum is going to be slightly to the right of those two adjoining leaves. And the reason for that to an arborist is that a clean cut allows again, it's sharp, allows the plant to properly heal. It's the best way to cut for the plant's sake. If you were to prune to the further to the right, it's going to be a stub. The plant doesn't have a way of cordoning off infection. If you prune it up there, it's just going to rot, and then the rot will go down the branch. And this is even more a concern in the case of trees. Anyway, a proper pruning cut is just at the union of those two leaves. And you'll see here in the next slide, please, Matt, the cut that was executed. Now, this cut corresponds to the height and the width of the plant that I wanted it to achieve for the year. That something that we hadn't mentioned yet, I'll mention here. The pruning, if properly done, not only the performance of that, but the timing will allow you to have the shape of that plant for the next 12 months. And the proper time to prune in this case, and in many of the cases that I've shown already, is called when the wood hardens off, the plant hardens off. That means in calendar 2020, in approximately August or so, the plants have ceased to put out new leaves. They're holding their own, they got the leaves up, they're generating photosynthesis, they're storing energy in their roots, and they're getting ready for another crummy winter. If you were to prune before that point, the plants have not finished doing their photosynthesis, and they will put out more leaves. And in so doing, they're actually using energy that they would have normally saved for the winter. But now, because it's pruned early and they still want to do more photosynthesis, they have to put out more leaves. And for you, the homeowner, after you pruned it the first time, it's going to grow back again. So why did I do it? So you have to do it the right time. You only do it once and it's done, and the plant will be happier for it, and so will you. So the pruning, as I said, just above the node, it's done exactly the same way and everything that we'll talk about. This is the deadheading cut that you'll do on pruning back roses, on hydrangeas, on virtually everything. It wants to be pruned just as I've shown you here. On the next slide, please. Said differently, this is a pictorial of a hedge. Maybe it's a privet hedge. Ideally, and it's not just 1/3 as you see here in the red. 1/3 is also a rule for cutting lawns. If you cut a lawn too tight, you'll leave the top of the grass plant exposed, and then the sun burns it and it knocks your grass back. Well, it's the same thing here. If you prune the plant too hard, you're taking away its leaves, its protection. You're pruning the photosynthesis away from the plant. You're weakening the plant. So a general feeling is two things from the picture. One of them is you have an ideal shape in the yellow. This is where I'm going. Set in your mind's eye where you're going to go, either by where the flagpole is or the car's parked, or any some way draw a line and then hold that line. And the recommendation is only a certain percentage of the plant should be removed in order to keep it healthy And then the last thing to say is after the plant has hardened off, which means it's substantially stopped its growing for the year. If you prune before, the plant's going to go and put out more leaves again, and all those little things are going to pop back up. If you prune too late, that's easier to forgive, but that the plant there might not have a chance to heal itself before the winter, which is probably the lesser of the concerns. But the rule of thumb is prune after the plant is hardened off. Next, please. What about my hydrangeas? I'll try to make this simple. There are two basic phrases in hydrangeas. One of them is prune after flower. That's pretty straightforward. And the other one that is the consternation of everybody is old wood versus new wood. And who knows whatever that means. Old wood versus new wood, the harder of the two things. The old wood means that the bud of this year, the bud of 2021, was formed on the plant in 2020. New wood would mean the bud the flower of 2021 is formed on that stalk in 2021. And the concern and the reason the phrase is mentioned is if you hard prune or take substantially a lot of that hydrangea off of its base in the prior year, and you prune off the buds of that year, the old wood, you won't get any flowers the following year. And one of the first things that arborists are constantly asked is, why didn't my hydrangeas flower? And they said, well, sir, it looks as if somebody has pruned them pretty hard, and this type of hydrangea needs the wood from last year to put out the flowers on the buds that it made last year. And it doesn't have the ability of doing that. So we need to let the plant grow again this year, and please don't prune them this year. All right, so there's that one. The next thing is prune after flower. That's just housekeeping, and will go a long way in extending the bloom of the plants and probably keep them a lot neater. Now, this one caveat, you don't have to prune hydrangeas. It's up to you. You will make the plant a healthier plant, and it will probably fit better in its surroundings if you do prune it. And that you choose. The ones you're looking at here are it's called paniculata. They are the ones that get all of the attention about, I didn't know when to prune it, so I did this and now I don't have any flowers. This is the ones you see in Cape Cod, all the beautiful purple flowers, and the common older variety was called Nikko Blue, Nikko, Nikko Blue, and the newer varieties are called endless summer type plants. The difference between them is that you can be much more forgiving in the pruning process on the endless summer because it has blooming on new wood or the wood that would form in 2021, as well as buds from 2020. So in the case of either plant, my recommendations to you is the following. As the plants are growing this calendar year, 2021, enjoy them, get some fertilizer on them. You change the color by changing the pH of the soil, and it's done prior to them starting to flower out. But once the flowers are there, just prune off the flowers as they're declining, and take them inside, make beautiful bouquets. But as the flowers stop, look at the structure, especially when the leaves fall off, and you'll start seeing the blonde colored twigs sticking up. And at that point, the older plant will have buds forming on it. This is the Nikko Blue, and look for the buds. They're right there, and they're usually kind of smaller than the size of a pencil eraser, tightly bonded to that upright twig. Those are the buds that you want to protect. Now, if we had a bad winter, 9 degrees is not necessarily friendly, and those buds can freeze, and it has nothing to do with your pruning. If the buds freeze, that's it. And we'll have to see what turns out. But that the buds make it through, those are the buds that you'll want for 2022. In the case of the endless summer variety, you can be, like I said, more cavalier in their pruning because they will produce buds the year that they do put out the new growth, and you'll get flowers no matter what. Now, in general, if you wanted to treat them the same, I would take the stalks that are coming up after the leaves have fallen off, take off all of the dead ones, and they die in the process of just growing. And then you look for the largest stalks, and I'd take out a third of the larger stalks and then leave the rest. And by taking off the larger stalks, you're going to encourage the plant to put out new growth. And no matter what it is, it's going to be beneficial. And you will still, because you've left 2/3 of the stalks on there, you're going to have old wood going into the new year, and you'll have flowers. Now, that's this one particular kind of hydrangeas. There's a number of other ones, and I've got some pictures here following on the next slide. The balance of the plants by name, you've got oak leaf hydrangeas that have a leaf that looks like an oak leaf. It's much larger, but it's patterned like an oak leaf. You've got the climbing hydrangeas that'll go up your chimneys or on your fence posts, whatever you want. You've got these big mop head flower things. You've got Annabelles. You have all sorts of other ones. And in general, they all prune to the same guidelines, which are enjoy them, give them away to your friends. There's plenty of, there's more flowers than you ever, it's like cucumbers. Where am I going to get rid of all these cucumbers? So in this instance, these are at my house. I'm haphazardly going through and pruning just to create beauty. And at the end of the season, after the flowers have declined, I'm pruning off the flowers. And then in the center, just slightly to the left, you can see the vertical stalks. Those vertical stalks are all brand new growth off the base of the plant that's probably 3 feet high. Those come off at the end of the year after the leaves have gone, everything. It's like an X-ray. When the leaves are off, you can perfectly see the shape of the plant, and I bring them back to the shape of the plant. The cut is exactly the same cut that I showed you on the viburnums. They are going down to the point where that upright branch is connected to the base at that union, and a cut is made, and then you'll go back to the original shape. Let me show you another example here on the next slide. The same plant, you can see I've been cutting off more flowers, is getting leggy. Look off to the left, and then onto the right. The weight of the flowers is actually tearing the plant apart. And then you put snow on top of it, and the next year you're just going to have an unholy pile of hay that's going to turn green, and then flowers going to be haphazard. So again, this plant to me is saying, hey, don't forget me. You got to get all these long straggly branches off here at the end of the season. In September, I'm looking at it in October. I prune everything off. There's no growth that's going to come out. And I return the plant to its original shape, and it will do this again and again and again. The same thing for oak leaf hydrangeas, prune them back after flower. The Annabelles you can prune to the ground. They're a wonderful plant to put next to driveways where people trample things. The plant wants to be cut down, and the next year it'll just reward you. So one more example on the next slide. Everything that you see here is all brand new growth. The flowers are on the top of the growth, and the stalks that you see that are vertical have all come off of the base of the plant. After the flowers have gone, then the leaves fall off. You've got the structure of the plant that is pruned with the same pruning cuts down to the base of the original starting point, and it's all done and it's all happy. Next, please. Here's another way of organizing it. I mentioned when I showed you that house that was covered with wisteria. You don't have to do everything at the same time. As a matter of fact, the seasons will lead you to prune properly if you're listening to the plants, or you have an arborist or a landscaper, someone that you can go to and say, what do I do about my azaleas? Or what do I do about my forsythias? The forsythia here will tell you the time of the year. Obviously, this is when the forsythia bloom. This is when the landscaper trucks come out. They wait for that. That's their sign. No one's ever told you that. That's a secret, but that's when they come out. And if you were to prune this plant in March, you could bring it inside, stick it in water, and it would flower for you. But if you pruned it too hard, you won't have any flowers because the plant can't recover. It's growing on last year's wood. So in this case, this plant wants to be pruned after flower as much as you want. You can take a forsythia and prune it to the ground, get the start back again, get it back in shape, anything you want. But wait until after it flowers and it'll be fine with that. Now, to go back to my question here about seasonal pruning, you've got 4 seasons. During the winter, now, I was talking to Ashley earlier, I've got work that I have to get done in Lexington while the plants are still asleep. We're going to do some pruning on some ornamental trees. Definition for you, I differentiate ornamental trees from shade trees. In the back, you can see some, I think those are hemlocks. That's a tree that's going to go to 70 or 80 feet. The large sugar maples, those are shade trees. The birches, pine trees, oak trees, those are all shade trees. In this picture in the upper left, that's a cherry. A cherry to me is an ornamental tree. So in general, I prune in the winter ornamental trees. They will handle the pruning. And again, you're just creating a balance of the structure. You're not doing a great deal of pruning. So I will do those in the winter. And then the next thing to do is pause. Nothing happens in the spring other than the guys with the lawnmowers come in, fertilization and all those things. But there's not a lot of pruning other than what might be left from storm damage, anything that's causing problems like that. But in general, if you prune in the spring, you're going to prune off your flowers. And sadly enough, with perennials and evergreen shrubs, you're only going to get 2 weeks worth of flower. So, just, be patient, it'll flower, and then you can go ahead and prune. Just like we talked about before, when I said with the viburnums and hydrangeas, you prune after flower. This is the same example. So as these plants have finished their flowering, you're welcome to prune them. It's easy to caution people about this, but that includes your azaleas, your rhododendrons, your enkianthus, your laurels, your andromedas, all of those spring flowering shrubs that give us so much pop in our landscape. After they've flowered, then you can prune. And again, the pruning cut is exactly as I showed you before. You're pruning at the union. You're looking at the plant to determine the balance of the plant, the shape of the plant in its surroundings against the house. You're pulling it away from the house and everything will go fine. Now, so we're at summer and we've gone ahead and we've done those pruning. As the wood hardens off, another signal to me, now you're into later on in the summer and early fall. Usually you want to get your pruning done there and get everything ready for the winter. And that will have taken you now through 4 seasons of pruning and give you a sense of balance for everything. All right, next slide, please. Where to prune? Now this is an interesting plant because this is a barberry and it's a plant only a mother could love. It's covered in thorns. It's invasive. But guess what? It's got beautiful purple color. And to be truthful, the only way I'll prune this is with shears because it's got so many branches going so many different ways. I don't know what to do with it. Anyway, the question, where to prune? You prune at that union and you prune for shape and you prune to open. And as I had given you descriptions before, the pruning is done inside the plant as best you can do it, unless it's a shrub, then you're doing it from the outside. You're doing the cleaning of the canopy, all of the dead wood, all of the damaged wood, anything hanging over the fence, something that's going to poke you in the eye. All of these things are priorities. Then you're shaping, and then you go on to the specifics of this. But more importantly, I mentioned the pruning at the union, but as we'll see here coming up, I'm going to talk to you more about trees, which is the next thing. Because the branches on trees are much, much larger, the possibilities of damaging the trees because of the way that they are pruned is also larger. And the major concerns here are ripping the bark off the tree, not purposely, but accidentally in your pruning, or pruning in such a fashion that rot goes back into the main trunk of the tree, or that the trunk of the tree is damaged. And we'll cover the do's and do nots of that next. Next slide, please. Before we get to the tree, here's an example of another bad hair day. Maintenance pruning to me, I showed you the crab apples that had overgrown. This is another example. This is probably a cherry tree or a crab apple or something like that. But to me, it sort of stock photo. Looks like it was planted in a public garden, maybe one of those community gardens, and it was just allowed to grow. To properly prune this tree, you would use the second term, rejuvenating pruning, which is not an effort of a single time, but it's done over a course of years, and I'll cover the detail on how to do that. But to the first term, maintenance pruning, in my mind, on shrubs is done once a year, only if required. On larger plant types like those Japanese maples, I told you the same thing, once a year. On crab apples, you can cheat and do it once every couple of years. On shade trees and other ornamental trees, you can do it once every 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. But I didn't omit anything in there that wouldn't be pruned. Now, exceptions to that, plants like Hinoki cypresses generally are not pruned. They have a nice controlled slow growth of 6 inches per year, unless there's anomalies with the plant. Generally, pine trees aren't pruned, hemlocks aren't pruned, spruces, Christmas trees generally aren't pruned unless there's some aberration. And the main reason is if you look at the needle structure on the plants, it's only on the perimeter where they're getting lights. The interior of the plants die. And if you were to prune off more than 6 or 8 inches of the plant, you're going to be back at wood that looks pretty dull and dark and no needles. And the other thing uniquely is if a plant's determined, in the case of those evergreen trees, if too much of the branch has been removed, it turns the branch off and it won't grow back. So just the perimeters. Now, let me go here towards the rejuvenation pruning, which we haven't talked about before. Next slide, please. The idea of rejuvenation pruning is that you take off a portion of the plant every year for 3 years. In this case, year 1, year 2, and year 3, then you're back to a new plant. So across the plant, you remove strong branches, year 1, 1/3. The second year, another third. The third year, 1/3, and then you've restored the plant. Next slide, please. This is the holy grail of tree world. And this is the arborist, one of the arborist's main things. You've got to know where the branch bark ridge is. That's the area in the center that looks wrinkled. You cut where his finger is, you cut at 90 degrees, you don't cut his finger. You cut where the finger is, you do not cut the main trunk of the tree. This looks like a tree lilac. And you don't cut a foot out on the other end. The tree has an ability, a natural ability to cordon off cuts in such a way that it forms calluses and doesn't allow insects and problems to penetrate the heart of the tree. If you cut it anywhere else by cutting too close to the tree or cutting farther out, you risk damaging the tree. And this is the cut that would be made 1 foot from the ground or 30 feet in the air. It's exactly the same thing. It's called the branch bark ridge. And one last thing here, as the size of that cut gets larger and larger, you switch from your pruning shears to hand saws, to chainsaws, to different mechanism, loppers, things like that. But the pruning shears are only good up to about 1 inch or so, and that puts a lot of pressure on your wrists. So larger tools for larger cuts. Next, please. Pruning tips. The first thing I want to tell you, and this looks like this is another bad hair day. The plant was ignored. Again, Japanese maples are damaged by winter, and this plant's too thick. It's going to get broken off. You can see all of the branches growing laterally on the bottom. The first thing that you got to know is what the plant is supposed to look like. If you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. So understand what the plant is, or get somebody to help you and show you how to do this. And then, as I said before, you do a crown clean, all the dead wood, all of the crossing branches, all of that. You do a crown thin, and then you start looking at the branches that are out on the far left and the far right and see if that makes sense with what you've got. Look at the plant in its surroundings and determine how best to do it. Next, please. What to remove. This looks rather stark. These are pictures in Switzerland of London plane trees, which is a relative of sycamores. And the kind of pruning here was done in Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's called pollarding. The purpose of this was to take the new shoots that I called suckers or water sprouts at the end of the year, and these were collected for cattle fodder and also for making small fences. And then they left these they called them monkey fists, the balled up ends of the plant in every fall. But there's one interesting thing here to show you. When you do a crown clean, you're taking out all of the debris that would get in your way. See how they look so nice and open? That's a crown clean. That's something that I always prioritize first thing and whatever, but what to remove. In this case, the first thing with crown clean, whether it's these pollarded plants or your crab apples, your dogwoods, what to do with my Kusa dogwood. The first thing you do is you look for all of these shoots that don't make any sense. Take them out with the cuts that I showed you before, back to the main part of the trunk. Branches that are damaged, branches that are too low that you keep hitting your head on when you're mowing the lawn. Those are elevating the canopy. Once you've cleaned the canopy, then you thin it out with a mind not only for looking for the aesthetics, but also look for potential problems, dangers. One of the obvious things that always comes up are power lines. Look out for power lines, and the plants and power lines don't make good buddies. If the snow gets too heavy on the plant or the plant rubs against the power line, you could risk losing the power to your house. So what to remove, those are kind of considerations that you need to have in mind. Then lastly, you can see here, as these plants mature, they're probably a foot or so in diameter right now. All of the lower branches have been removed. It's a tree. It's supposed to have a trunk. It's not a shrub. And all of those lower branches would be removed in the process of pruning over the time that they had. Next slide, please. Things not to do. Well, these azaleas made it into spring without anybody pruning off the flowers. That's the first obvious thing of not to do is, look at the plant, look for buds, and if you can, learn your plants, at least what azaleas look like, what rhododendrons look like, and wait until after they flower before the pruning. Next is, I mentioned 1/3, attempt to maintain a pruning style that does not take the plant down to the ground. There are certain kinds of plants that you can do that to, but it's a bad thing to do for the vitality and the health and the structure of the plant. There's a few exceptions, and those two exceptions that immediately come to mind are lilacs, where you can do the kind of pruning for rejuvenation, and you take out 1/3 of the large canes, and you allow the suckers to come in, and the next year you take out 1/3, and the third year you take out 1/3, and then you've got brand new lilacs. The other one I mentioned earlier were forsythia and privets. You can take those down to the ground anytime that you want to restructure the plants. Next, please. Lastly, I showed you on the tools a pair of shears. This is shearing, and the intent here is it's labor saving, and you're going for flat surfaces, ultimately flat surfaces. What you do not get when you use shears, whether they're hand shears or electric shears or gas shears, however these are being accomplished, when you get a flat surface like this, you never get the proper pruning cut on the individual branches. And if you went up and examined any of these, this topiary was in Rhode Island. You'll see the tips of branches sticking out. They'll be 4 inches before the next leaf. And to me, those are all eyesores. But shearing is another way that we have of making shapes desirable and presentable. But in general, it's a specialty or something that's, I would say, is saved for hedges. Otherwise, it's not something I would do. Oh, I'm sorry, I mentioned barberries. I use shears on barberries. That's it, I think. What's next? Any more slides? Oh, that's me.
That's good. Perfect timing.
Do I have any questions, Ashley?
Yeah, you have a 3. And
Yes.
you covered some of the ones I already had. Do you have deer where you are? Do you fence them off? Do you fence off your plants, or do you wrap them against the deer?
The thing about deer is the following. Anything that they sell as far as aids to keep the deer away are called deer deterrents. There's nothing that necessarily makes protecting the plant deer proof. The sprays, the Irish Spring soap, everything. If a deer is hungry enough, they're going to eat your plants. I would rather use burlap and do it up to at least 6 feet, or fencing. Fencing needs to be 8 feet. Fencing at 6 feet is child's play, and deer don't even stop for that. But in general, deer deterrents, they're done every 30 days, and then burlap and make sure that the deer can't get to the plants.
Right. If you have left the flowers on the hydrangeas, what should you do in the spring?
Just clean them up. They're just, you'll look at the stalk and you'll see those new buds setting there on the stalk. You don't want to prune off the flowers for 2021. But if there were things left over from 2020 you never got to, just take them off the top and leave the rest of the stalk. And as the temperature warms up in what they call growing degree days, which is the accumulation of warmth, the plant will slowly start at the base of the plant and start growing up. And as it does, you'll watch those new leaf and bud start taking shape, and they'll start slowly expanding to the point where they've died. And at the very, very top, they'll have died off, and you can prune it there.
Right. Should I remove double leaders?
Yes.
Yes.
In the case of double leaders, you have this thing, it's called codominance. And there's so many things that are done in trees that people don't know. I describe pruning a tree, especially after about 4 or 5 years, exactly the same way as sending the kids in to get orthodontics for their teeth. You want to set the tree's structure so that it will be a good tree going on for the rest of its life. So double leaders are not necessarily a desirable thing, and you reduce one by maybe 2 feet or 3 feet, and the tree gets a message, oh, I'm not supposed to be growing here, and it'll go up the other one and it'll correct itself.
You have good analogies. I like the lipstick one earlier. Leanne wants to know, do you have any tips for boxwoods?
Tips. Boxwood can be damaged with snow load, and in general, if there were an eye care plant, and I differentiate, who cares to eye care. I would use burlap, or at least I would use string to maintain the shape of them. Otherwise, they'll splay out with the snow load, with all of the snows that we've had. Boxwood doesn't handle that. The other thing is boxwoods in general are very, very susceptible to at least 3 different kinds of insects, and then there's funguses as well. So they're a tough plant to keep up with. There's a lot of things. In general, they grow slowly. They don't have to be pruned every year. And I would much rather see them be pruned with hand shears than use shears and clip all the leaves at some point. And it looks ratty, but it takes a lot of time to keep up boxwoods.
Matter of fact, when Jim came to the church and pruned for me, he referred to some of the pruning there as funeral home pruning, which is what he was talking about with that shearing.
It's the same thing in front of the bank. They use shears to make everything look like gumdrops. And
yes. Yes.
It gets it done. It works.
Carolyn wants to know, how do I pick a tree to plant? Oh, that's a big, broad question, Carolyn.
No, that's the first question is, you plant the right plant in the right place to thrive. And don't buy it just because you like it. You got to figure out where it's going to be, how much light it's going to get, what the soil is going to do, or the rocks. In the case we talked earlier, is it underwater? Well, there's certain trees that won't handle water. You got to plant a red maple or a birch or a willow. So you've got to understand the surroundings and plant the right plant in the right place.
Yes, and I'd also watch for how close it is to the road if you're here in Lexington.
Or the power lines. Even the towns plant trees that are going to be 50 feet underneath power lines that are 20 feet in the air. That doesn't work.
And then the company comes along and chops it.
Then they charge you twice.
Yes. I thank you, Jim. We made it just on time. Matt is probably sitting there counting his minutes here.
No, not at all.
And I thank you all for being with us tonight. I hope you found this as helpful as we did. Everybody stay warm and stay healthy, get that vaccine, and we will see you next Wednesday. No, not next Wednesday, Wednesday in March, Wednesday, March 11th. Good night, all.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight.
I would have expected some before.